our lecture on Petrobrusians. Petrobrusians. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please click the right button on the right corner of your screen so that you will be updated about the lectures. Let's continue our study on the Protestant Reformation. We started looking at the pre-Reformation reformers and reform movements. We just finished John Wycliffe, John Huss, and just now we completed Cathars. And the next group is Petrobrusians. Who are there? Petrobrusians. Petrobrusians was the earliest sect hostile to priesthood. They were the followers of eloquent Peter of Bruys, Peter of Bruys, who about the year 1100 began to declaim against the corruptions of the church and the voice of the clergy. Peter of Bruys. Sources suggest that Peter was born to Bruys in southern France, southern-eastern France. The history of his early life is unknown, but he was a Roman Catholic priest who had been deprived of his office by the church hierarchy for teaching unorthodox doctrine. Particularly, he began his preaching in Dauphiné and Provence, probably between 1117 and 1120. The local bishops who oversaw the diocese of Embrun, Dye, and Gap suppressed his teachings within their jurisdictions. But interestingly, in spite of the official repression, Peter's teachings gained adherents at Narbonne, Toulon, and in Gascony. In this map, you could see in these three locations: Narbonne, and the second location here, Toulouse, and the third location here, Gascony. So Peter admitted the doctrinal authority of the Gospels in their literal interpretation, but considered the other New Testament writings to be valueless, as he doubted their apostolic origin. He questioned the Old Testament and rejected the authority of the church fathers and that of the Roman Catholic Church itself. And Petrobrusians also opposed clerical celibacy. We have seen the other group, they encouraged clerical celibacy, but here Petrobrusians opposed clerical celibacy, infant baptism, prayers for the dead, and organ music. We are looking at the waves of Reformation, the waves that hit the Catholic hierarchy. Here we see a kind of wave from them. They opposed clerical celibacy, which is very much prevailed in the Catholic Church, infant baptism, which is very much practiced in the Catholic Church, prayers for the dead, which was very much practiced, and the culture in the Catholic Church has been opposed by these Petrobrusians. And now, treatise of Peter, the Venerable, the one who did some kind of study on him and interacted his teachings, he said, in the preface to his treatise that attacked Peter of Bruys, Peter Venerable, the other man who opposed Peter Bruys, summed up the 5 teachings that he saw as the errors of the Petrobrusians. So Peter the Venerable explained about their teachings and he exposed the errors of the Petrobrusians. These are the errors. Treatise of Peter the Venerable brought the errors of this cult. Number one, the first error was their denial that children before the age of undertaking can be saved by the baptism. Petrobrusians, they denied the child baptism, as I said. According to the Petrobrusians, not another's, but one's own faith. It is not the faith of the parent that saves the children, but it's the faith of the individual that saves. Even now today, in some of the mainline churches, when they give child baptism, they have this kind of concept. The child will be saved by the efforts of the elders. That's the reason when they give a kind of child baptism or the child dedication, they say, you know, they pray for the parents, saying that, you know, parents will help them to know the children. Yes, it is true in one sense. Parents and the family members will discipline and help them to know Christ, teaching and doing all this. But ultimately, it is the individual's faith that saves, which is a good point from this Petrobrusians. In that part of their argument, they are very much biblical. So, together with baptism saves, as the Lord says, he who will believe and be baptized will be saved, but he who will not believe will be condemned. That's the reason Petrobrusians, they opposed child baptism. That idea ran counter to the medieval church's teaching, because it is a very much counter to the medieval church's teaching. What is the medieval church's teaching? The Catholic Church in the medieval period, they strongly believed child baptism, particularly in the Latin West, following the theology of Augustine. Do you remember in the first course, History of Christianity, number 1, in that course, we have studied about Augustinian theology. Augustine promoted child baptism. Theology of Augustine, in which the baptism of infants and children played an essential role in their salvation from the ecclesiastical guilt of original sin. The second main thing in their teaching is error charged with some exaggerations was that the Petrobrusians said edificers for temples and churches should not be erected. The Petrobrusians are quoted as saying it is unnecessary to build temples, since the Church of God does not consist in a multitude of stones joined together, but in the unity of the believers assembled. Look at some of their strong points, some of their strong arguments, which are very much strong points in the Reformation. And when Martin Luther brought a kind of revival, these all points counted. Catholic Church spent so much money to build temples, particularly why during the Martin Luther, during that period, people were so much harassed and helpless. They were just waiting for a kind of revival. You know why? Poor were oppressed. Heavy taxes to build St. Peter Cathedral. To raise the funds, they sold all this indulgence and then they put heavy taxes on people. So we are just looking at their aggressive spirit towards Catholic beliefs and practices. Their spirit of Reformation, Petrobrusian spirit of Reformation, can be seen here. On the other hand, the medieval church taught that the cathedrals and churches were created to glorify God. It is not only during the Middle Ages, even now today, because of the corona, people stopped constructing, but till 2000, even in the 2020 and 2019, Christianity in India particularly had this kind of belief. Huge churches were created to glorify God and believed it to be appropriate that those buildings should be as grand and beautiful as wealth and skill could make them. Since the context came, I'm telling, the more money invested, the more glory. Our people are so proud of their big churches. Our church has been constructed with 10 crores, 20 crores. It is there in the minds of people, but it is unbiblical. God doesn't reside in the temples. He resides in the heart of the individuals. But the Petrobrusians, we should appreciate their concept of building in the temple. They said it is unnecessary to build temples. Since the church of God does not consist in a multitude of stones joined together, which is very much biblical. They strongly revolted to Catholic ideology, saying that the church of God does not consist in a multitude of stones joined together. Now, let's move on. The third point. The third error enumerated by the Peter the Venerable was that the Petrobrusians command and sacred a cross to be broken in pieces and burned, because that form of instrument by which Christ was so dreadfully tortured, so cruelly slain, is not worthy of any adoration or veneration or supplication. The sacred crosses. People were hanging sacred crosses, glorifying, it became so much. Some people started adoring, veneration, they're not worthy. That's the reason the Petrobrusians, why are you venerating cross? We should not venerate or adore the cross. It's just a symbol. But for the avenging of his torments and death, it should be treated with unnecessary dishonor. Cut in pieces with swords, burnt in fire. That was seen as an iconoclastic heresy to the Catholics, and as acts of sacrilege by the medieval church, and still is by the Catholic today. Petrobrusian said it is nonsense to hang cross and venerate cross, keep cross everywhere. He gave a call to burn all those crosses, put all the cross in the fire and burn them, because people were crazy in that medieval time. Some people started worshipping the cross. They were against such. Number fourth. The fourth one here is Petrobrusians denied sacramental grace. Do you know what is sacramental grace? When you take bread and wine, there is a grace of God that comes in you, which is not really biblical. Petrobrusians are right in that context, rejecting the rite of communion entirely, let alone the doctrine of the real presence or the ancient scholastic account of transubstantiation. They deny not only the truth of the body and the blood of the Lord daily and constantly offered in the church through the sacrament, but declare that it is nothing at all and ought not to be offered to God. They say, oh, people, do not believe the bishops, priests, or clergy who seduce you, as in many things, so in the office of the altar deceive you when they falsely profess to make the body of Christ and give it to you for the salvation of your souls. That's the context here. Since they believe the transubstantiation of the elements, they say salvation for your souls when you take part into that bread and wine. It is not the Bible. It is just a memorial. The term, how this memorial concept came, because these kind of people started thinking, revolting against this Catholic beliefs and practices. Later on, people started thinking and brought that revelation. Otherwise, today we would not have this memorial concept of the Lord's Supper. The term transubstantiation used to describe the transformation of the consecrated bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. was first used by Hildebert in about 1079. The theory had long been widely accepted as orthodox doctrine at the time of the attacks by Peter of Bruges. Less than 2 centuries later, in 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council officially declared transubstantiation the necessary Orthodox Catholic explanation of the Eucharist. Eucharist is very much given attention in the Catholic Church. Let's move on. The fifth point can be discussed here. The Petrobrusians ridicule sacrifices, prayers, alms, and other good works by the faithful, living for the faithful dead, and say that these things cannot aid any of the dead, even in the least. The argument is this: the good deeds of the living cannot profit the dead, because transferred from this life, their merits cannot be increased or diminished, because beyond this life, there is no longer place for merits, only for retribution. They have contributed to a kind of Reformation spirit, saying that the good deeds of the living cannot profit the dead, because praying for the dead and buying indulgence for the dead and giving money for the dead, this is all a kind of practice was very much prevailing. Here is a group who attacked that kind of practices in the Catholic Church. Now, in or around the year 1226, Peter was publicly burning crosses in St. Gauls near Mimes. The local Roman Catholic public, angered by Peter's destruction of the crosses, what they did, they cast him into the flames of his own bonfire. So Peter died. This was about this Petrobrusians. Tomorrow, we study about Waldensians, and if time permits,